And just some photos here from street view. It was better weather, obviously. You can actually see the entrance. So this is the frontage of the severed lot. This area to the west of the entrance is pretty much wetland. And there was an environmental impact study that was completed in support of this application. They did identify the wetland feature along with the appropriate buffers to development. This is the existing entrance that would go into the severed lot directly off of County Road 21. And I did circulate this application to County Roads Department, and they had no issue with the sight lines here for this existing entrance. And this is just looking towards Haliburton Village, looking east. And again, this is the frontage of the severed lot. And as we move away from that wetland, it becomes more or less just it's a mixed hardwood bush. And then this is the existing entrance that would go into the building envelope. So just in summary, the application was endorsed by Minden Hills Council. The environmental impact study was prepared by Riverstone, and it did identify a building area that's outside of the wetland and outside of the 30-meter buffer. The application conforms with the county official plan, and staff recommend approval subject to the conditions that are outlined in the staff report. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I believe Mr. Nimigan is here if there are any other specific questions about the property. Thank you.
Any questions that the committee members have for Adam? Brandon, did you wish to speak to the application?
Nope. But if anyone has questions, I'm happy to do so.
Started.
Okay. Well, if we have no questions, could I then have a mover and a seconder to grant provisional approval? Member Kennedy, seconded by Member McKelvey.
Okay, be it resolved that the land. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to. Okay, I'll start that over. Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee received the report related to application for consent H-03422 Zwart, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton,
you don't need to.
Provisional approval of application for consent H-034-22 Zwart, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report.
Don't worry about it. Just stay. I logged in as Steve.
Steve, your sound is on. If you could mute yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, Travis, if you could mute.
I need to stop.
Did everyone hear that resolution, or would you like it read again? If you wouldn't mind reading it again, please, Adam.
Okay, committee, I'll just read the second part of it. The first part is that we received the report. Oh, I'm getting echo now. Okay, I'll try it again. The Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent H-034-22 Zwart, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report. Member McKelvey.
In favor?
Member Kennedy.
Yes.
Member Snyder.
Yes.
And Chair Danielson.
Yes.
Application's approved.
That's approved. So the next application is by Warren. I believe may be represented by Planscape. And it is to create a new shoreline residential lot in Dysart et al.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So there are three speakers for this application. The primary presentation will be done by Mr. Gord Nielsen of Mikalski Nielsen. And Gord is the author of the the site evaluation report that was submitted on behalf of the client. And Mr. Nielsen has a PowerPoint, which I'm going to run for him. And we'll get that in just one moment.
sorry to interrupt. Do you guys need me to stick around, or is my my part all finished?
Brandon, no, you're good to go. Your application was approved.
Yep, perfect. All right, thanks everyone.
Hello, committee members. My name is Gordon Nielsen from Mikowski Nielsen Associates, 16 Robert Boyer Lane, Bracebridge, Ontario, P1L 1R9. Adam, thank you for putting the presentation up. I'm joined today by Sean Warren, the property owner, and by Debbie Vandenacker from Planscape, Rick Hunter's colleague. Rick is not able to join us this evening. And the next slide, please. So the purpose of this application is to divide a very large existing vacant lot into two lots with shoreline frontage on Redstone Lake. Both of those shoreline lots will have a shoreline frontage of 133 meters, and they will have lot areas of 7.4 and 12.8 hectares respectively. This property will also be subject to a zoning bylaw amendment application to convert the lands from rural to shoreline residential. The next slide, please. These lots are located at the southwest end of Redstone Lake, shown in red on this this map. They're accessed from a private road, Adeline Trail, that runs through the property. Next slide, please. This drawing shows the proposed lot configurations. There's a portion of the lot, a large portion, which is on the shoreward side of Adeline Trail. On each of those, the severed and retained lots, there is a substantial building envelope that's been identified, with an additional building envelope, a supplementary building envelope on the far side of Adeline Trail. The purpose of such a supplementary building envelope would be to provide additional space for such things as a garage, or if a builder wanted to have the septic system on that side of the road. Now, given the scale of these lots, these building envelopes look fairly small, but each of these building envelopes is a minimum of 0.12 hectares, or about 0.28 acres, 0.29 acres in size. So fairly substantial. The next slide, please. So this application has been reviewed in accordance with all of the relevant planning documents. With respect to the provincial policy statement, development is required, of course, to be consistent with the PPS, and it's been demonstrated that there will be no negative impacts on natural heritage features. Next slide, please. The development must also, or the severance must also be cognizant of the requirements of the Haliburton County Official Plan. There are no identified constraints or natural heritage features on the property or immediately surrounding lands within the land use schedules for the county official plan. This is a lake trout lake, but is not an at capacity lake trout lake, Redstone Lake. And there are opportunities to preserve the forested character and the rural landscape with development of these lands, as well as with the natural quality of the area watercourses. Next slide. The proposal conforms to permitted uses for rural lands in the official plan. It will not have any adverse impacts on the nearest aggregate use, which is located approximately 1 kilometer away. Seasonal and resource-based recreational uses on existing private roads are recognized. And in our opinion, this complies with the Haliburton official plan. Next slide, please. With respect to the municipality of Dysart et al. Official plan, Dysart staff have reviewed the application and had a report indicating they were satisfied that the proposal conforms with their official plan, and that was also confirmed through Dysart et al. Council. Subject to the conditions requested in the staff report, we concur with the staff review in their opinion, and we concur with their recommended conditions. There are areas of steep slope, which are an area of use limitation that are identified throughout the shoreline riparian zone of this property. And those are addressed by moving all development back from those constraint areas into areas which are not constrained by steep slope. Next slide, please. Also, with respect to this official plan, the proposed building envelopes and septic envelopes significantly exceed the minimum requirements for setbacks in that official plan. Proposed conditions of approval will ensure protection of natural heritage features of the property. Next slide, please. With respect to the natural environment water quality work that was done as part of my engagement on this property, I prepared a site evaluation report, which included an extensive background review and 2 site inspections. Now, there are no wetlands, deer yards, areas of natural and scientific interest, areas of critical fish habitat, significant wildlife habitat, or environmental protection areas on or adjacent to these lands. The primary constraint is steep slopes and very steep slopes in proximity to the shoreline, which should be entirely avoided with locations of driveways, building envelopes, and septic envelopes. And a winding path down to the shoreline, likely involving some steps, can easily be accommodated on both lots. I've walked down to the shoreline from the building envelopes on both these lots. There are good opportunities for a shoreline structure together with a small and carefully installed shoreline amenity area on both lots as well. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, there's a secondary building envelope, which is identified on the opposite side of that line trail on both lots, which are good locations for such facilities as a garage or as an alternate location for the septic system. Our report addresses fish habitat, species at risk, significant wildlife habitat, and water quality matters. And it includes 21 detailed recommendations to guide future development. And those recommendations can and will be implemented through a combination of the consent agreement and site development plan for each property. And these provide for a high level of protection for the natural environment and site aesthetics. Development is to be set back more than 70 meters from the shoreline on both of these lots, and that provides the protection that's required for the steep slope areas. And by leaving that area that's within 70 meters of the shoreline in a virtually untouched state, it will also ensure development on these lots is minimally or visible from the lake or surrounding properties, if visible at all. Thank you. Next slide, please. Just wanted to show you a few pictures of conditions within each of these lots. On the top left is a building envelope, the primary building envelope within the severed lot. On the top right are the steep slopes which are encountered moving towards the shoreline on that lot, which are to be avoided. And then in the bottom center is a buildable backshore area within that lot. And the next slide, please. This slide shows a retained lot, building envelope, the primary building envelope in the top left, the steep slopes which are to be avoided in the top right, and then the second buildable backshore area in the center of the bottom. Thank you. The next slide, please. So in conclusion, the site evaluation report confirms site suitability and compliance with the natural heritage provisions of the PPS and the Haliburton and Dysart et al. Official plans. The development complies with the requirements of the official plans. Dysart et al. Council has indicated support for the application subject to conditions, and we are in agreement with those conditions. The development will require site-specific zoning, and a consent agreement and development plan will be required to implement the conditions and the recommendations of our report. So in our opinion, this proposed development is appropriate and represents good planning and is in the public interest, and we recommend that be approved subject to these standard conditions. Thank you very much. Myself, Debbie, and Sean are all available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Nielsen or those in present? Member Kennedy.
Yes, and thank you. And I have a number of questions and maybe just clear up some confusion for me. On page 16 of your report, you give a number of details here about the lot size. Maximum of 50 or a minimum size of the building 55, but no more than 372 meters. And I look at Dysart's W5 WR5L that shows 557 square meters is the allowable. You're saying 15% coverage, and in the zoning bylaw it says 2.5% for W5RL. That's on page 81 of the Dysart zoning. If you want to look it up. That's more confusion, so I'm not really sure how that works on that one. The second part I have is on the aggregate, the 1,000 meters. You're saying that I just need clarification on the 300 meter and the 1,000 meter difference. And the official plan it states that it has to be 1,000 meter barrier, and you're saying actually you're saying a portion is within the 1,000. It's actually almost all of the proposed new lot is within the 1,000. Just wondering your comments on those two things. Let's say the thing with the zoning bylaw is just be semantics, but the aggregates do concern me about how that is going to be, how that's affected when it says in the official plan one thing. And then the last one is the official plan also states that these lots should have 150 meters of frontage, and these are 130. And I know you're saying that you have more acreage, but comment on that as well. So 3 things. Okay.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Now, I'm not the land use planner, so I'm going to start with question number 3 and work backwards, and then I'll ask Debbie to speak to the planning matters as well on this. So your third item was with respect to the setbacks from the aggregate use. Oh, no, sorry. The last one was with respect to the 130 meters versus 150 meters. And you're right that the area of use limitation applies to, in the Dysart et al. Official plan, it applies to lands within 45 meters of the shoreline. The development here avoids area of use limitation. So the reason for a larger lot, if at least through my lens, when you have areas of steep shoreline, are that it's more complicated to build on those lands, and you need more land to be able to build. It also creates more opportunity for the generation of sediment-laden runoff when you're developing on steeper slopes. And it also creates development which is generally more visible from the lake. So all 3 of those things, I think, are considerations for why it's appropriate to have a larger shoreline frontage. Those obstacles are overcome by having development set back on this lake. It's quite extraordinary to have development set back 70 to 90 meters from the lake as the building envelopes on these lots. And that is because that is the area that's outside of the area of slope constraint. It is far removed from the lake. So from a sediment and erosion concern perspective, given the distance from the lake, given the grades of the area where development's being proposed, which are gentle, it appropriately addresses issues of sediment erosion concerns, and it appropriately addresses issues of concern with respect to visibility from the lake. So I hope that addresses that, and that has satisfied both staff and council at the municipality of Dysart et al. That it addressed their area of use limitation.
So that's an acceptable exception to the official plan then.
Yeah, and keep in mind that their area of use limitation extends to 45 meters from the shoreline, and I think for that very purpose, because it's intended to address that proximity issue in the area of greater risk. So we avoid that entirely by setting things substantially further back. Now, with respect to aggregates, my understanding is there is and this might be something that either Adam or Debbie wishes to speak to further, but my understanding is there's a prohibition to development within 300 meters of an aggregate operation to avoid incompatibility uses, things where an aggregate operation is an irritant to the landowner, or where you have landowners who are trying to stop the aggregate application because it's creating real nuisance for them. The distance to 300 from 300 to 1,000 meters is to be looked at on a site-specific basis, and that's to really look at compatibility. And in this instance, retained lot, the development envelope on the retained lot is actually over 1,000 meters away, and on the severed lot, it's about 950 meters away. So it's at the very outside of that band where there could be potential concerns. And Mr. Hunter Planscape was in touch with the province and with the municipality on this issue. There are several intervening lots, including some that have been recently created, that are closer than this to the aggregate operation. So this isn't a new land use. It's consistent with the character of the area, and there's no reason to expect that this land use would be at all incompatible with that operation, or that the landowners, the builders on these lots would be subjected to any nuisance from the aggregate operation. And that also includes that there's a fair bit of topography in the aggregate operation at this site, with a rise of land about 25 meters above the height, the maximum elevation of these lands, or at least where the building envelopes are. So no concern with an incompatibility of use. And now on the zoning bylaw question that I'm not qualified to respond to, so I'll pass that on.
Neither am I, so that's why this may be confusion on my part on this one. I'm not a planner, just trying to read more of the detail of the W5RL, so WR5. Thank you.
Good evening. Would you like me to address that? Is that okay with the chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Certainly. So good evening, members and chair. It's Debbie from Planscape. So I'm filling in for Rick. I am less familiar with your zoning bylaw than Rick probably is. So I think between Adam and I, we can answer your question. But you were a bit muffled when you went through that first question. Would you mind repeating that for me?
Yeah, not a problem.
Thank you.
So when I look at the difference between what was in your report and what's actually in the zoning bylaw of November, latest update, November 22, dwelling unit area, maximum percentage of the lot. You're stating 15% of the lot can have up to 15% coverage. In the zoning bylaw, it actually says 2.5% for WR5L, which it's not an issue as long as the new owner would know that he or she may not be able to build as big a place, even though it has to be a minimum size. And then the next part of it, you say that no more than 372 square meters. As far as main building maximum gross area, and yet in the bylaw it says 557. It's just that's off the chart on page 81.
Yep, you're correct. I'm looking at that as well. So I would offer a correction at the 557.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one was an actualized open space, just that whoever purchases it realizes that it's 80% open space on that zoning rather than 50% on almost everything else. Just some cautions. They're not really criticisms or anything, just verification and cautions. Whoever purchases this lot.
That's appreciated. I see the discrepancies in the report. I would assure you that as the zoning bylaw amendment is required to recognize the severed portion of the lot. So all of that will be captured. And so the building envelope is being identified because of the constraints on the site. And it's almost sort of to allow the owner to understand where they can locate that. The details of that is not included in this. And so the zoning bylaw amendment will be specific as can, and then that gets turned over to the building department. But there is a lot coverage maximum of 15%. So that's total, all of your buildings. And then the dwelling unit area is 2.5%. So it works down into more specific. Yeah. Adam, did I characterize that all correctly from your perspective?
Yeah, I believe so. Usually the zoning, the more technical matters related to zoning, I defer to the local planner's report, because I don't, I admit I don't have all 4 zoning bylaws on the top of my head, to be honest. I just wanted to comment on, sorry, I've got a bad echo here. Somebody has Zoom. Okay. Just to member Kennedy, there was a question about the frontage reduction, and I'm just I'm just looking at the Dysart staff report, and it appears in the analysis here that the endorsement from Dysart Council for the smaller lot sizes was based on the enhanced setbacks because of the slopes. So what the planner at Dysart said here is that because these buildings are going to be over 200 feet back, it's appropriate to go a little bit smaller on frontage, and that would be recognized through zoning, if that helps.
Questions from other members of the committee? Member Snyder.
Thank you. I just have questions on two different topics. The first being, because the building envelopes are so far back, are there any restrictions on how much clearing there can be towards the water? I can just envision that somebody's being prominent on the hill is going to want to clear a lot of trees so they can see the lake. And with the steep slope, I'm concerned about that. What restrictions will come into play? Maybe Adam?
Yeah, I'd say the first layer of protection here as it applies across the county is our tree cutting bylaw. So that basically takes care of the first 30 meters or 100 feet. The protections or restrictions for further clearing, I believe, are found in the site evaluation report, because and Gord can speak to this. One of the requirements is going to be that development has to occur within those building envelopes, and in the multiple recommendations in that site evaluation report, I believe there are performance clauses, let's say, that restrict any tree cutting or removal. And the recommendations of that site evaluation report will be implemented on the severed lot through what's called a consent agreement.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And then I have to agree, it was looking at the site plan, it was difficult to get the scale of the building envelope, especially on the retained lot. So I actually tried to scale it to figure it out. It would be helpful if a dwelling was shown so that we could reference that. The other question I have about the retained lot is there a setback requirement from the private road? Because what's shown is not very much.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the road right of way, and again, I don't know off the top of my head if Dysart's zoning bylaw has a setback requirement to a right of way. I'm thinking it might. I think I've talked to Chris Warsan about this. In the worst case scenario, buildings and structures are not permitted on the right of way. But that is a good question. And off the top, I don't know if there is an actual setback or if they treat it as a road, in which case those setbacks would apply. But again, I don't have those numbers in front of me.
Okay,
Can
thank
we
you.
ask for clarification of that?
Sean Warren here, the owner of the property. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
To address Mr. Snyder's comment, the size of the lot, and I'll defer to Gord, who did the very thorough site investigation. But they're on the both retained and severed lot. There's the road that moves down to 3 properties at the bottom of that roadway, Adeline Trail. There is a significant amount of space between where that road snakes through down to the bottom and where the proposed site development is going to be. I don't know the exact amount but I think it's got to be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 50 meters to 60 meters from the roadway. And obviously any conditions that would be required or any kind of suggestions would be implemented before any site development is done. Gord, anything else to add on that?
There is certainly room to set something back from that area. I just wanted to speak to the issue of maintaining the riparian area as well, and the concerns that Member Snyder has about steep slopes. He's quite correct. Those would be slopes which I wouldn't want to see destabilized. So amongst the 21 recommendations of our report, there's a requirement that the pathway wind down to the shoreline and use steps as may be appropriate. that it be no more than 2 meters wide, and that it be constructed of permeable materials such as bark chips that just promote or stone chip that would promote infiltration along its way. It is also to be a shoreline amenity area, which is a maximum of 4 meters by 6 meters, and which we specifically said is to be a deck, which is built on piles that can be accommodated. The grades do moderate a little bit closer to the shoreline, and that can be accommodated on those slopes without impact, but a very, very limited shoreline amenity area. There's also recommendations with respect to tree removal within the riparian area, which is only limited limbing of trees to provide view windows down. There's a requirement to maintain on the retained lot, 65 meters is a minimum buffer, and on the severed lot, a minimum 80-meter buffer in a fully natural state outside of the pathway down to the shoreline and that small shoreline amenity area. So I share your concerns, Member Snyder, that this is an area where we have to treat that shoreline riparian area very carefully, and that's been done through the recommendations, and those recommendations then can be implemented.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Could I have a mover and a seconder then to grant provisional approval of the application? Member Kennedy, seconded by Member Snyder.
Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee, oh, am I muted?
If we can hear you.
Okay. Be it resolved that the Land Division Committee of the County of Haliburton received the report related to application for consent H-060-22 Warren, and that the Land Division Committee for the County of Haliburton grant provisional approval of application for consent H-060-22 Warren, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report. Member McKelvey.
Yes.
Member Kennedy.
Yes.
Member Snyder.
Yes.
And Chair Danielson.
Yes. Thank you to Gord and Debbie. Excellent information.
Thank you.
Good luck with your development. Under other business, the only comment that I'd like to make is that there will be a report coming forward to County Council with respect to the size of the committee. As I'm not sure if you're aware, Pat, but there was an issue at our last meeting where we had a tied vote, and it's just the pitfall of a 4-member committee. So we're recommending that we go to 5, and I believe that there will be some a couple of options provided to County Council for how we can go ahead and do that. So hopefully we can get that done fairly quickly so we don't run into another concern. Under the next committee meeting, the date, as you would have seen in an email, is actually on the 17th of April, as opposed to the 10th. So that concludes our business for this evening. And if I could have a mover and a seconder to adjourn. Councillor Kennedy, Member Kennedy, and Member Snyder.
Be it resolved that the March 13th, 2023 Land Division Committee committee meeting be hereby adjourned.
All in favor? That's carried. See what years of calling you Councillor Kennedy do?
The
one other thing that I think that Adam, we might be better served by you being in the office for the meetings. If we're going to have technical difficulties at the very beginning. For once, all of your members were here in good time, and anyway, if we could work something out there, that would be good.
Sure. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Night all.